All right, welcome to the special edition of the IOER Research Forum. My name is Christoph Woiwode. I'm moderating the session today. And we have here Professor David Manuel-Navarrete. He is Associate Professor at Arizona State University School of Sustainability. And currently he is a Research Fellow at the IOER. His transdisciplinary work focuses on the intersection of sustainability, indigenous knowledge systems, and green technologies. His research on inner-outer sustainability explores how shifts in individual and collective mindsets can drive systemic change. David collaborates extensively with indigenous communities, especially in the Amazon, to integrate relational knowledge into innovative solutions for Earth stewardship. And I think we will hear about some of his research today. His approach emphasizes especially the blending of Western science with spirituality, transcultural rituals, including plant medicine and indigenous cosmologies to foster inner transformations. And I'm really looking forward to your talk, which is entitled Inner and Outer Technologies for Sustainability Transformations. So thank you very much, David, for being here. And we will have first his presentation and then a detailed discussion about your insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Christoph, for the introduction and for bringing me here, actually. And thank you, everyone, for being here, for making time for this presentation. So what brought me to inner sustainability was an emotion. The frustration that I felt for the fact that despite having more information and data than ever before and more tools to address the meta crisis or the poly crisis, and also more resources, instead of seeing a lot of progress, it's almost like a regress, right? So something very important, something very big and fundamental is missing from our sustainability efforts. And what an increasing number of scholars, sustainability scholars around the world are proposing is that what is missing is the inner dimension of sustainability, or the way I frame it is the inner perception or inner ways of being, inner modes of perception or inner modes of being, okay? And, this is the inner sustainability or the inner dimension or perception is a transversal issue. Most science, and this is one of the points I will make, is focus on the outer, but you don't need to drop your outer skills and your outer research in order to incorporate the inner. It's not an either or, right? It's an and both, right? So I hope through this presentation you will find, if you are not already doing it, find opportunities for actually bringing this inner dimension. So in any transdisciplinary dialogue, it's very important to agree on some basic definitions, because otherwise we are using the same concept to refer to different things and the communication is very difficult. So I will start with that. And then I will comment briefly, very briefly, on how I see the inner sustainability challenge and the way in which me and other people are tackling this challenge, which is through the approach that we call inclusive transdisciplinarity. Then I will try to illustrate this approach with two examples, the Spirits Lab and the Earth Stewardship Hubs in the Amazon. So let's start with the definitions. Super important definition, inner, outer, right? It's gonna be crucial for understanding the rest of the presentation. And it's probably going to be counterintuitive. The way I define these terms, what they mean in the context of inner sustainability, is probably very different to what Western educated people have been trained to believe, because the model that most of you probably have been unconsciously or consciously adopting is the Cartesian model from Descartes, the philosopher from France, right? The mind-body division model, which in that model, the inner would be the mind associated with the brain and thinking, And the outer would be the body and everything that the body can enter into contact with or perceive, right? And that's not at all what I mean or what people in inner sustainability mean. What we mean by inner is a relational approach, relational perspective, or relational way of being, right? And the outer is a perspective or way of being that is based on fragmentation, on division, on analysis and separation, okay? So having that in mind, let's try to embody it a little bit, because otherwise, it's just like a concept. So I'm gonna ask you, well, I'm gonna propose a reflexive exercise. You're free to join or just observe, right? I'm going to ask you to reflect on the motivations for coming here today. And this can be, it's a short reflection, not be, whatever comes to, and it can be extrinsic motivations, like you want to get something from it, or intrinsic motivations, you just enjoy being here, What happened when I asked you this question? Where did you go? Anyone? Okay, well, yeah. Well, you were to your thinking, right? You were to a thought process, yeah, and the feelings maybe, right? And you weren't probably to reasoning, but come to your draw your attention away from your thoughts to your bodies, right? You can maybe change your posture to feel more comfortable or not, or just stay, and feel the sensations, body sensations, and maybe focus on your breath, right? In and out, we breathe together. Okay, so you can come back now. And this, for maybe a shallow perspective on spirituality, would be already the inner dimension, but it's not what we mean by the inner dimension. Because to get into the inner way of perceiving or being, we need to take a step further. And this step is I'm going to ask you to focus on your breath again, but instead of you breathing, breath being something that you do, breath is something that does you. So try that now. How it would be if you are out of the way and breath is something that does you. Instead of you breathing, you are being breath. Well, there are lots of techniques, to actually do this seriously. We won't have time now, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense, because that's the relational perspective. That's the inner dimension, in which breath is not something you control, not something you act upon, something inert, but it's something with agency that you enter in relation with, right? So you can apply that to your breath, and you can apply to everything in life, right? And so in this model, then the outer dimension is based on separation, fragmentation, control, right? And the inner dimension is based on relationality. And the problem is that we have been educated to focus on the outer dimension, to the point that many people in Western society is just that they operate by default on that, right? And maybe could it be that all the sustainability challenges that we face have their root cause in this overemphasis, in this predominance of the outer way of perceiving and being? And if that's the case, then sustainability has to be about rebalancing, right? There is nothing wrong with the outer way of perceiving, but we need to find to strike a balance between the two, okay? And that's how we start this balance with inner and outer technologies, okay? So inner and outer technologies, I draw inspiration from Michel Foucault, which is still the author most cited in all times. And he distinguishes, he dedicated he had two phases in his thinking, right? And he mentioned that there are 4 types of technologies. There are technologies of production, which are geared to manipulating things, right? And this is an outer technology because it's based on control. Technologies of signification, which are geared to manipulating signs and symbols. And technologies of power, which are geared to manipulate conduct or behavior, right? He dedicated the first part of his life to technologies of power. But towards the end of his life, after writing the Hermeneutics of the Self, it's a book that I highly recommend, he proposed that there is a 4th type of technologies, technologies of the self. And these technologies are inner technologies. And his conclusion was that these were actually more important than all the other 3, or more equivalent, at least in their power. So, you know, that's what I will say in terms of definitions. And the final one, sustainability transformations. Transformations, I'm not going to define it. There is a huge literature on that, but I want to say that transformation is no longer optional. Transformation is underway, right? And the real question is whether we're going to meet it with love and wisdom, or just with raw power and maybe artificial intelligence, right? Or with all the 4 things, right? So what's the gap in sustainability science, the inner gap in sustainability science? I think we all can agree, and if we don't agree, then we can discuss it later, that sustainability efforts often focus on structural and technological solutions, and that this overlooks subjectivity, intentionality, relationality, including spiritual connections to land, others, and self. So an interesting question is, why do sustainability projects fail to address the inner? And I'm not going to answer this question. I could talk for an hour probably on this question, but we don't have that time. Maybe we can discuss it later. But maybe the more important question is the how, not the why, right? And how do we create solutions where both inner and outer modes of perception and being are synergistic, okay? So I will focus on this challenge. And the way in which I have been, or me and others have been trying to address this challenge is through this approach, inclusive transdisciplinarity. Now, transdisciplinarity, people could argue, is always inclusive because it consists actually on bringing stakeholders, right, to the decision-making process or even to the knowledge production process. So why do we need the word inclusive there? It's because to indicate that it needs to include also the inner ways of perception and being in the world, right? Because given that the outer mode of perception is the dominant in society and also in science, there is always the risk of just considering that, right? So we bring other knowledges to the table, but we include them as a whole, completely, with their onto-epistemologies, you know, with their perspective of the world, and with their inner-outer balances, okay? And these different knowledges enter into conversation horizontally. The notion of horizontality is an inner notion, let's say. Verticality involves comparison and ranking, right? And horizontality is a more inclusive way of interacting. And the other people's knowledge are valued, of course, but also we apply an extended criteria of validity. It's not only knowledge is not only experimentally and valid in terms of reasoning, which are important, it has to, but also experientially. Validity can be experiential, not only experimental. So this onto-epistemological, are we familiar? Maybe I need to say what, well, ontologies are the way in which what we consider to be real, right? Epistemologies are about how we go and learn about that which we consider real, and the methodologies is the actual technique that we use, right? To do that learning. And this inclusive transdisciplinarity requires not only accepting that there are different ontologies, but being able to understand and to see the problem at hand or the situation at hand from these different ontologies that are on the table. Okay, so that's what I call reflexivity, right? You become aware of your own ontology, and diversity. You actually embrace the possibility that there are different ontologies, all valid at the same time, right? Even if there are contradictions between them. So you have to create a space to hold the contradiction, right? By the way, I have included references to my papers, or papers that I have co-authored with other people. Of course, there is much more literature. This is just because this is done in the context of this fellowship. I thought important to link it to the papers that I have co-authored, right? So in addition, inclusive transdisciplinarity focuses on practical community-led outcomes that address real-world challenges. And this is not necessarily the type of capacities that we receive in schooling or academia, right? So it requires maybe some relearning and learning different ways of doing research. And it emphasizes reciprocity and shared ownership in co-designing solutions. Reciprocity doesn't mean tit for tat, doesn't mean that everyone has to contribute equally with the same, but everyone contributes with what they do best or have to contribute, right? And it's never the same. So there is no commensurability. Okay, so in practice, how can work? How all this can work? Or at least how we can try it to work. 2 examples, the Spirits Lab and Earth Stewardship Hubs in the Amazon. The Spirits Lab is a lab that has been in existence for 1.5 years, more or less. It's based in Arizona, but it's mostly people from the Americas and Asia. And these are people who are come together around this question: how can spiritual rituals and ceremonies facilitate inner-outer transformations towards sustainability? And we look at different types of rituals and ceremonies, some of them involving plant medicine, others like ayahuasca, in case you don't know, it's a brew of 2 plants, Banisteriopsis capi, which is a vine, and another plant with DMT content that has been used for millennia, at least centuries, by shamans and healers in the Amazon, across the Amazon. And that now has become very popular among Western people who look for inner experience, let's say, right? Or inner growth. Well, each person might be frame it in different ways. But we include those type of ceremonies as well as sweat lodges, for instance, ceremonies that don't involve plant medicine, or the use of tarot cards as a tool also for, well, not a tool, but another ceremonial context, right? In which you can elicit these inner-outer transformations. And these spiritual rituals can trigger lots of changes, but these are, I just selected a few to give you a sense, right? They can foster emotional interconnection with nature, community, and the sacred, activate collective agency by healing our relationships, and inspire sustainable action and resilience. So one example of one of the studies that we have conducted in the context of this lab or associated with the topic of the lab is situated in Taquihuasi Center in Peru, which is a ceremonial center that uses ayahuasca therapeutically, and it's indigenous-led, the way they use it. So we surveyed 68 participants coming from Europe, from the United States, etc., Western people. And then did interviews and focus groups. And the focus of the study was on relationality, how relationality had been changed. We found some things, that there were some inner shifts towards more reciprocity with non-humans and towards a relational ontology. These are really deep leverage points. If you're familiar with the leverage points literature and sustainability, this is very deep. So the type of, it can elicit a very large or significant transformation. And then there were also changes in outer actions, changes in consumption patterns, changes in lifestyles, being more oriented toward community living. Many of the participants, a large majority, reported that after the ceremony, they consider moving to a more rural area. And many of them actually did move, right? So things like that were kind of surprising. And another important key finding is that the post-ceremony integration, as well as the set and the setting and the context where the ceremony takes place, right, is key for understanding the potential of these inner technologies for sustainability transformation. So some implications is that we know already spirituality drives nature connectedness. There are plenty of studies, I think this is established, right? But it can also drive pro-sustainability change, and that's what the lab is focused on. And the other thing is that there is an opportunity here for sustainability science to actually help or work, collaborate, co-produce, co-design transformative ceremonies, or ceremonies that are more transformative in terms of not only what happens in the ceremony, but how the post-ceremony integration is designed. Okay, so how could this be applied to space, which is one of the big topics in the Institute? Space, arguably, is an abstraction of place, right? And we use lots of outer technologies to shape space, planning and maps, well, lots of things, right? And the point here is that incorporating inner technologies with these outer technologies, combining them can help us to understand better and also improve maybe, or make a stronger the relationship between place and space. It can help us to make place more intentionally, as well as start experiencing space again as sacred. This is a map of the Mahakumbh Mela. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but it's a festival in India that happens every 3 years on the shores of the Ganges River. This year, the estimate is that over 600 million people attended, bathed on the Ganges. This is not a city. This is a camp that is set just for the festival that lasts 45 days, right? So over these 45 days, 600 million, maybe if it's overestimated, well, they used high tech to, map satellite maps to do the estimates and models with artificial intelligence. So the models might be more or less accurate, the estimate of the attendance. But even if it's 300 million, it's like the EU population, right? So this is an amazing achievement. And I doubt that this could be achieved using only outer technologies or only inner technologies, right? It's the combination of the two that allows for this to happen. So that tells me that there is a huge potential here to actually combine these two in other contexts. So second example, Earth Stewardship Hubs. We have been piloting those in Ecuador for starting in 2018. And these are partnerships between indigenous communities and universities, or it can be also research centers, right? And they are training centers, but they are also more than training centers. They are forest sanctuaries for reconnecting with nature, fostering creativity, and rediscovering purpose by the students who attend there, right? Who are being trained in becoming Earth stewards, while also generating an income for the local people so that they can be better equipped to continue being stewards of their land, right? So something very important for this partnership to work within universities and local communities is to have a boundary organization. Boundary organizations are organizations that understand and deeply understand, even embody, the ontoepistemology of the local communities and the ontoepistemologies of the university, of academia, right? So the model is based on this notion that people from around the world can go to be trained as earth stewards, and they receive training and degrees from universities and knowledge that is maybe based on outer technologies at the moment, and also the relational knowledge from local communities, right? And the immersion in their culture and ways of being and perceiving the forest, and at the same time generate this income, right? So I was very lucky, very fortunate to find an amazing boundary organization, IARINA. It's a language school. It teaches Quechua language to foreigners. And the initial funding that we got was to scale IARINA, which is located close to a town, to an Amazonian town, scale it deep in the forest to the Guarani Nation, to these two communities. And you can see the Guarani Nation is mostly forest and rivers. All the transportation happens via canoes. These pink lines are roads, right? The dotted lines are projected roads. So it's very important that to generate economic alternatives for these communities that are based in their culture, because otherwise what happens is that young people migrate to the city because they are forced to by the government to be educated in the Western ways of knowledge. And then the link with the elders is lost, the knowledge is lost, the culture is lost. There are not opportunities for young people to actually stay in the forest. They leave, and then extractive companies can come and do business there. So the idea is to generate these green economies that can sustain these cultures and the people in the forest. So for the first years and for the first project, for the first grant, we participated with Arizona State University, La Fana University, and UNAM in Mexico, and with the local communities and IARINA and local actors. And the first years were to build relationships. That's super important, right? You have to invest in building relationships in order to have like this inner dimension of sustainability. But also building these relationships is important to do things together and to fail together, right? To try to make things work. So it's the inner and the outer that has to be combined and generate synergies, right? Some of the projects that we did fail, others endure, but the learning stayed. Building relationships is super difficult, right? Relationships require all that I have said before, ontoepistemological openness, understanding the perspective of the other and all that. But it also requires being open, feel vulnerable, right? And to reflect always in your own biases and how these biases are perceived by the other. It requires time, but it also requires that maybe you are going to be betrayed or feel betrayed, and you endure that betrayal, learn from it, and decide whether you want to continue the relationship or not. Relationships don't last forever, but the ones that you invest on can be very rewarding, right? So, of course, it requires being there, right? It requires the more you learn about the language, the more you learn about the way of thinking and being, and the more you share, the better, right? Okay, so then through these relationships, we were able to create these 2 cabins in each community. Only one of them is currently in operation, but we have been bringing for many years, or not for many years, for 5 years, students from 4 American universities and researchers, biologists, anthropologists, etc., to collaborate and co-produce knowledge and being trained as through immersion in the forest and participate in some of the ceremonies, etc. Right? But the thing is that after this, in addition to the training of Earth stewardships, we realized, especially during COVID, that there was also an opportunity for technological innovation, right? And the way this works is that universities can provide high tech in the outer perspective, and local communities can provide the contextualization of this high tech in there and the relational knowledge. And that benefits universities because, of course, they have applied research and excellence. And the communities can receive these technologies that are adapted to their needs, and that can be actually only available through this type of collaborations. So that's how the solar canoes against deforestation initiative emerged. It was funded initially by the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service, by the Women and Philanthropy ASU, and Tamalpais Trust. And there are 2 canoes in Ecuador now that we built, and 1 recharging station. And we are going to build a 3rd canoe for Peru, and that's funded by the Honol Foundation. And the mission of this initiative is to electrify river transportation in the Amazon by retrofitting existing gas power canoes and installing these solar charging stations. Now, retrofitting here is important because we could just buy a motor here in Europe and ship it there. But what we do instead is to retrofit what they are already using, just taking the gas motor away and putting an electric motor, right? And that's if there is any issues, any mechanical problems, then it's easier for them to find the parts and to solve it themselves. And it's also much cheaper than bringing the motor from abroad. There are clear advantages for the electric power canoe and also some disadvantages. Lower operation cost, but higher investment. It's quieter. This is important because the gas power canoes are super loud. The peque-peque is the system that they use, right? It's called peque-peque because it makes this noise, peque-peque. And it reduces pollution, but it allows only for now long short distances travel. So this is a video of the first prototype that we created of an electric motor. You can see it in the back. And, it's very important, I think, that the inner-outer dynamics are getting right. The outer technologies, which is in this case, solar power technology, in this context is super complicated to implement, right? So if this was to be implemented in a factory, you are going to create this retrofit in a factory in a Western country or an European country, you can control most of the elements, right? So the outer perspective kind of makes sense. But here is the river that changes a lot. There are lots of people involved. There are conflicts. I mean, it's a total mess. And unless you build strong relationships and actually have this inner perspective, right, in which you maybe need to talk to the river and ask for permission because the river might be very variable and do its thing. And sometimes it's tough to make sense of all these changes, right? So you start seeing how there are lots of factors and actors involved. The Amazon rainforest is so amazing. It's the intensity of life there is incredible. The number of plants and insects, and so it's once you are there, it's almost impossible to just adopt the type of mindset and perspective that you can adopt in a more lifeless place. So this is the second prototype. For the first one, we also put like a roof, but this one was improved in terms of the hydrodynamics, in terms of cost, etc., right? And it's still like an electric peke motor. And you know, it's the logistics, as I was saying before, also is super complicated, right? So the boundary organization and the fact that we had collaborated for at least 3 or 4 years in terms of bringing students and all that was fundamental, right? For being able to achieve an outcome like this. And we're also breaking like a inertia, a tendency in which the technology, when it arrives to these communities, is not designed or shaped according to the needs of the community. It's designed according to the needs of the market, right? And you can see that the local people here appreciates a lot that they are the first one to have this technology, and also that the technology was co-produced, was co-built, and their knowledge was part of the co-designing and implementation of the solution. Okay, so this is the last thing I wanted to say. What resonates with you? How might these ideas apply to your work? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, David, for these insights.